Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here to talk about the original The Terminator movie. I believe 1984, I believe, was the year this movie came out. Reasonably, when looking at this movie, you can't help but also say, well, this movie was completely really copied and pasted into the Terminator Genesis movie, and ultimately people could rationally say that's what maybe ruined this movie or probably ruined that film. Is just the blatantly like, hey, we're just gonna shot for shot duplicate a lot of the stuff from the original film and showcase this just to ultimately tell everybody, hey, yeah, like we're doing this again. Kinda. So, when going into this movie, I actually like how in this first iteration, this first film, it comes off very much as a horror film, where every one of the other ones end up just being an action adventure kind of film. So, going into this movie, we of course have some very interesting actors who ultimately have been in this movie. We have Arnold Schwarzenegger, who of course has played a litany of roles and stuff like that. Conan the Barbarian, twins, yeah, twins. You put the papers in the fact, yakety yak. Don't talk back. In the shower, he's singing in the shower. Okay, kindergarten cops. Batman and Robin for some people, very few people, but still. Um, Arnold has done a number of last action heroes and other kinds of True Lies, The Sixth Day, all kind of number of other kind of films at the end of the day. We also have Michael Biehn, who ultimately is Kyle Reese. Ultimately, we have Michael, who had been in the Aliens movie. We have him also in The Mandalorian, much more recently. I know he was also in a Scorpion King's movie, or a Scorpion King movie, and so on and so forth. Because reasonably, rationally, there is kind of a few things randomly here and there that I have seen of Michael Biehn. I know there was also some movie that I had reviewed, but then I had to unreview it because ultimately, basically, there was a bedroom business scene in that movie, and kind of throughout that ultimately kind of led me to not had me to forcibly unreview that movie. Um, but maybe I can pause here to figure out which one it was. So let me pause here. All right. Well, evidently he was in Scorpion King 4, and also the name of the movie of which that had to unreview was the movie called The Victim. That name doesn't really quite pop into my brain, but ultimately the visual of the poster of the movie did. So I was like, okay, like that movie is a movie I remember watching, and I thought it was pretty. It was a pretty decent movie, even though like the story might not be exactly the most decent thing to see. But anyways, going into this movie, Linda Hamilton, I probably have seen little things here and there of other things that she has done, but ultimately, rationally, the only thing that pops into my brain is just Terminator for me. I think she had done some movie with Jim Belushi, but heaven forbid I remember at all what that has anything to do with anything. Um, but yeah, so kind of reasonably for most of this film, most of anybody is kind of other tied with the Aliens movies, the Aliens franchise in this film. So yeah, reasonably there seems to be some correlation between those films and this one. So going and watching the Terminator film, the original one, again, really liking how it was a horror movie, and I think it should have stayed that way. Like, I think it always should have been a horror movie, but if anything, it always just went right back into, like, oh, well, it has to be an action adventure because, like, these movies has to be, like, fun and for the whole family and whatever. So, Recently, when I saw an interview of Arnold when he would consistently talk about the Terminator, which I appreciated, ultimately we found out that Arnold was originally going to be Kyle Reese's character and O.J. Simpson was going to be the Terminator. And so I was like, man, wouldn't it be interesting to have seen that movie and ultimately realizing how eventually O.J. Simpson's life played out? Um, probably would have had to probably would have had to do some different things. But anyways, we uh, we going into this film was or us going into this film, I really enjoyed this first iteration. I think that's where I found it fun in the Terminator Genesis movie for them to go back to this, just because of how like I thought that this movie was so much fun, and ultimately this is a time period piece that ultimately there isn't much of a significance to be able to take down this Terminator during this time period, which I didn't quite rationally understand how easily and quickly they could have done it within Terminator Genesis, but they couldn't do this here. They couldn't figure it out. Uh, so, going on into this movie, there are some fascinating things that the Terminator does in this film, which she doesn't, because ultimately there was at one point in one of the movies where there was a Terminator where there was a female Terminator. Like, some of the stuff that they do in this early movie, like, you never really quite see them do much of again. And that's the thing that kind of sucks about the other movies, is just that there isn't quite a lot of times when they really push how much the Terminator really could be able to do, because a lot of times it's just pushing to show some effect or to show some ability that this Terminator has, instead of doing the small little intricate things like being able to uh, kind of pretend to be someone else for the sake of getting some kernel of knowledge about their target, or reasonably gets to the point to where in the later movies, of course, like you have it to where you have the Terminator now that is ultimately protecting whoever, and they can sniff out when there's lies or something like that, where it's like, okay, well, that's going to be a moot point to have this kind of scene now, because it ruins it. It ruins it because ultimately then the Terminator that is killing the target basically is just like, well, like I'm trying to ambush this person and it's not going to work, because ultimately we have the Terminator that is going to protect the target, that is going to sniff out or whiff out that this person's lying. And so reasonably that whole scene kind of like deflates and diffuses that whole line of having somebody talk to somebody that isn't that real person. Ultimately, I liked the first film because it like I really wish that we could go back to there not have been in every single iteration of the Terminator films to have a protector Terminator, but when looking at it, it's like, well, there has to be that, because reasonably it's like the Terminator that is going to have to forcibly go against uh, the target, Sarah Connor, in this movie, has to be way overmatched and impossible to like write it in that it's like, oh yeah, this is the liquid metal Terminator and who could be anybody, and is now going to have to go up against Sarah Connor without any protection of a actual Terminator, because this Terminator could turn into anybody and really seduce Sarah Connor to the point and kill her easily. It is what it is. But the funny thing is, they never play around with the whole fact that they could have reasonably and or rationally. You could have had a Liquid Terminator come back to be Kyle Reese or to be John Connor, and that's what they could have done. But they never did that. Uh, to ambush Sarah Connor, and ultimately she would assess that it's, oh my god, it's Kyle, or oh my god, it's like they could have gone any number of routes. If you had to forcibly kill Sarah Connor, then the Terminator could have been Kyle Reese. If the target was Kyle Reese, you could have had this person come back as Sarah Connor and kill them. Works either way. But anyways, we rationally, like, we have to kind of showcase how Sarah Connor is kind of struggling to get through her normal day-to-day, trying to be a waitress at some restaurante, and really just effing that up, messing that up. And so we're really kind of showing that that Sarah Connor is just kind of like desperately trying to get through her life, and to the point where we even have to mention that within this movie that she can't even balance her checkbook, much less balance the fate of what they will make of in the future. Really showcasing that this girl is much more terrified about the news of which she's watching, consistently hearing a magical set of names, or a magical set of words that are going to accumulate to her name, that are ultimately going to otherwise scare her or frighten her into calling the police. So I think the best part about this movie is the real build up. Because ultimately we have it to where the Terminator in this movie is a serial killer. And I think that is the best part about this movie, is to build up a Terminator as a serial killer, instead of just a robot come from the future, which ultimately that's what they do in the other films. Is they just say, well, instead of giving us a horror element, they're going to give us a, like, oh, well, like, yeah, here's another Terminator that's going to come in and just find whoever the person is miraculously, and then be able to, like, have this, like, literal, like, chase throughout the entire movie. Because that's all the other Terminators are. It's just a chase against time, or a chase against being able to figure out who is going to be the ultimate culprit for the benefit of the future, so to speak. So, reasonably and or rationally, the thing that we kind of get into the later Terminator films is just the fact that every single thing is ultimately going to be inevitable. So, when looking back at this, I never quite understand why the Terminators have to go all the way back to try to get Sarah Connor, to try to kill her, because when looking at it, everything that is going to be coming to pass is ultimately going to come to pass regardless. They kind of have mentioned that repetitively through the other films, that ultimately, like, when you get to Terminator Rise in the Machine, where we ultimately have John Connor that said, yeah, we didn't need to stop Judgment Day, we just needed to live through Judgment Day. Because reasonably there is no stopping Judgment Day. There is no stopping having someone with this knowledge to eventually go up against this machine. And so, reasonably, every single thing ultimately just becomes inevitable. And so, reasonably, to have this whole time traveling thing of this one kernel of knowledge that eventually will be spilled to someone. Because the more and more that either Kyle Reese talks about it or Sarah Connor talks about it, ultimately it's going to bleed into everywhere. So I think that's all that I have to say for the cryptic like version of this show. So let's get into the spoiler time. So let's go into that double five. Yeah, this movie is still really enjoyable. Really, there is something about this movie that, like, no matter what happens for a number of any of the other films, you could still go back to the original Terminator movies and still thoroughly enjoy them, even though it's decades later and this and that. Um, they are still really solid and still really good films and still stand the test of time today. There are some points in time where you can kind of see that there is fake backgrounds in some portions of this movie, but when looking at it, it doesn't really matter because you can kind of barely make it out. Um, so, anyways, let's get into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, we ultimately have within this film, like I said, a very horror like element. So, we have it to where Sarah Connor is showcasing that she's a waitress at some restaurant. It seems like she's getting every single order messed up, and ultimately she is getting ice cream in her outfit for her troubles. And so, reasonably, we eventually have it to be told to Sarah while her being at her restaurant that, hey, go ahead and check this out. And so Sarah Connor looks at this TV and ultimately to be told that there is a woman called Sarah Connor who had been killed. Because ultimately we have a Terminator that goes naked back in time to ultimately go and to find a couple of punks to ultimately have them ask, it's like, hey, nothing clean, huh? So, reasonably, we have it to where we have these punks that are going to pop out a knife and try to scare this robotic Terminator who is walking up to them butt naked. And reasonably, the Terminator is asking, give me a clothes. Give me a clothes. And so reasonably, we have it to where the punks are going to attack said Terminator just to get a fistful of blood inside of them, and ultimately to get killed and murdered horrifically, to the point where one of the thugs ends up throwing the Terminator his clothes. To ultimately end up having this Terminator go into a gun store to buy an Uzi 9mm and all this other stuff, all these other weaponries and laser scope like guns and stuff like that. To ultimately the guy who is the gun store owner, I believe was in the movie Gremlins. And so ultimately he's selling him all this stuff, supposedly, and Arnold ends up putting a shotgun shell into one of the weapons, and ultimately the store owner's like, oh, you can't do that, and he's like, wrong, and kills him. To ultimately we have it to where Arnold, interestingly enough, goes into the phone book to try to find any person who has the name Sarah Connor. Funny enough, you can't exactly do that now. If they try to remake this movie and have him be the phone book killer, he can't. You can't exactly do that. If anything, if anyone would have, they would they would have to do that differently here. They would probably have to go through some like cell phone tower to end up finding these people, ending up finding Sarah Connor through either social medias or try to find her through like if a Terminator hooked themselves onto a like a satellite kind of thing, they would easily be able to find Sarah Connor now. Especially if she has a Facebook or an Instagram or whatever, they could probably figure out where she actually lives. Especially if Sarah Connor gave them all kinds of information through social medias and stuff like that. But anyways, we have it to where in this movie, this iteration, we have the phone book killer that is now the Terminator. Uh, Easily and quite iconically, we have it to where uh, the Terminator ends up knocking onto some door of some woman that ultimately he asks, Sarah Connor, and she's like, yes, and ultimately breaks into the door to shoot her down, which I'm like, yeah, like, horrifically yes, but we're having like Terminator just like he's firing so many bullets into this woman. You would have thought with like a Terminator, all he would need is like one whole shot to kill a person. But no, like the Terminator is making sure that this woman is definitely dead. Like firing 4 to 5 bullets into this woman, I guess, to definitely make sure that she's dead. You would think that he would just probably shoot her in the head or in the heart like any SWAT team person would tell you to do, and that would be the way of death. But I guess for the Terminator, it's like, no, we have to shoot them multiple times. We have to repetitiously, continuously shoot people multiple times to confirm their death. So, pushing on, we have to where, again, Sarah Connor is like, oh my god, there's a person with my name on the telly who's dead. That sucks. So, recently we have it to where we have to also showcase the police side of things as well. We'll get to the whole Kyle thing a little bit later. We also have uh, the police force that is ultimately mentioning like, oh my god, there's a serial killer on the loose, and they're going after people that all seemingly have the same name. What are they going to call him? The phone book killer? Because you can't do that now because it doesn't rationally make sense because not everyone has landlines and everything like that. Um, but now you would just have to like again poke your way through a satellite and figure where she lives. Because again, you could easily do that. So that's what they did with Transformers. They basically did the same thing for Transformers. You would forcibly have to do that here. So going into now Kyle Reese. So we have Kyle who is showing his bare butt to the world as he falls from out of the sky, or falls into a spheric ball of time travel, and ultimately he ends up stealing a pair of pants from a homeless person because really he was digging his threads, and so yeah, you couldn't go into a store and just steal your pants and shoes and whatever that you need. Oh no. You had to steal it from a homeless person, you douche. You schmuck. You garbage person, you. So, you ultimately have Kyle stealing the pants of a homeless person because he's a jerk. And you ultimately have a homeless person ultimately mentioning, hey, police officers, this guy stole my pants. He stole my pants. So we have Kyle who is booking it and ultimately seemingly running around ultimately to seemingly disarm a police officer to ultimately ask him, what's the date? And ultimately, he's like, Thursday, the 12th. What year? The year is year. So we ultimately have it to where Kyle is eventually going and stealing the shotgun from off of the police car, but he is also running through a store to steal a bunch of stuff as well. Stealing a pair of Nikes and also stealing a trench coat so that way he can look really, really cool. Uh, we eventually have it to where ultimately the police are after him in this shop, and he ends up sneaking away by ending up going into some photo booth like thing, and then ultimately revealing that he was in the photo booth when you see his sneakers. So we have to where Kyle Reese is breaking through stores, and again, he had to steal pants from a homeless person. And we'll never let that go. We'll never let it go. So we have Kyle who ends up eventually having to saw off his shotgun because if Arnold has a bajillion guns and everything like that to his disposal, we are just going to have Kyle Reese just sawing off a shotgun to make it much more of an impactful weapon. So, moving on. So we ultimately have Sarah Connor. Sarah Connor, yes, moving into what is to be a girl named Ginger's apartment. They kind of share a apartment together. We ultimately have Matt, who is consistently calling either Ginger or Sarah to ultimately uh, lead out some fantasy of the talking of love, I guess, because ultimately I can't really say what that actually is because heaven forbid you actually say that on YouTube. So Matt, who ultimately I know from the movie Top Gun, who ultimately plays, I believe, Val Kilmer's Iceman's sidekick in that movie, ultimately is in this film, and ultimately he is again talking the words of love to Sarah Connor, which ultimately Sarah Connor is not in love with Matt because ultimately Matt evidently assumed that it was Ginger, but instead it was actually Sarah. And so Sarah's like, "Hey, yeah, Matt's calling." So really, it seems that Ginger is really into music, even to the point to when Ginger and Matt are having some bedroom business. They're just listening to music, and I'm like, okay, I guess that could be an interesting thing to do. But like, you would think that like music wouldn't exactly be a thing that you would use to like increase your bedroom business, I guess. But I get whatever it is. And like I guess this girl's just really into music, so that is what it is. Pushing on. So we have to where Sarah is leaving for the night to ultimately go to a techno noir because ultimately she knows full well that Matt and Ginger are getting some bedroom business going on. So ultimately she's leaving to a techno noir to ultimately be still around music because ultimately Ginger is a fan of music, but ultimately Sarah needs to go to a techno noir. So, by and large, while Sarah is out, she's hearing yet again from the police force because the police force is releasing a statement so that way ultimately it can get every single person who is Sarah Connor to come forward to be protected. Because the police force is like, hey man, like we need to have these jokers, these news people work for us to try to protect this girl because ultimately the police have been calling several times Sarah Connor's phone number to ultimately get her to come in so that way she could be saved with her life. So reasonably we have to where Sarah Connor ends up getting the news of another death of a Sarah Connor, and she's like don't touch it, because ultimately they were going to switch the telly, and Sarah Connor was like, don't touch it, because ultimately I want to hear about another Sarah Connor's death, and I ultimately want to also know that quite possibly it seems that there's some serial killer that is killing all the Sarah Connors in the world, and I might be one of those people, so I should probably call the police probably pretty soon, right? So we have a tour. Sarah Connor goes into this techno noir, this really loud club, to ultimately call the police. What a stupid thing that is. That makes no rational sense. How is the police force going to be able to hear anything that is going on within this very loud nightclub? It makes no sense. But so we have it to where Sarah Connor is supposedly calling the police and getting transferred all over the place, because that doesn't make any sense either. Because this person's life is on the line. Like, ultimately, she is the Sarah Connor, and ultimately, she's going to be the killed. And instead, Sarah Connor just getting bounced around from police department to police department, waiting for her life to still be on the line. And so recently, we end up having to get it to where Sarah Connor is calling, or is getting to the one detective that ultimately is tied to this case. And Sarah Connor's like, yeah, please don't transfer me over to anywhere. I've been on the phone for 4 hours listening to really loud, hard techno music and trying to get transferred over into any number of these police areas. So we have the one detective that is otherwise tied to this case, and he's like, hey, where are you at? Hey, how's it going? Luckily, I'm not the Terminator that's going to use my information against you to try to kill you. Luckily for me. So, luckily for me, that you are the right person, and I'm the right person. Good enough. Because ultimately, we have at some point where Sarah Connor calls her mother, and that is actually the Terminator, because quite easily and simply, the Terminator knows who any of the friends of Sarah is. But the funny thing is, we don't have it to where the Terminator sounds like Ginger and answers the phone and ultimately says, well, hey, yeah, I'm Ginger now, and could you just come home? We really need you to come home. But anyways, so we have it to where Sarah leaves a message for Ginger after talking to the police, ultimately telling where she is. She's at the Techno Noir, and it seems like there is somebody following her. And so the police are going to be coming fairly soon. So, because ultimately we have Kyle, who is ultimately following Sarah Connor, because ultimately Kyle Reese can be able to afford to get into this tech noir for reasons I don't quite understand, and also just be able to really love techno music, because ultimately he is from a future which ultimately have robots that were trying to kill him, and ultimately he had uh, been in the future scene where ultimately he had been in uh, this underground like cave of sorts, where ultimately a Terminator shows up, and dogs can end up tracking the Terminator. It's really cool and neat. It's really awesome. And then we ultimately have a guy that is very muscular, and immediately that doesn't come off to somebody's head as being like, hey, this guy is way much more muscular than anybody else in this entire underground like place. I think he's the Terminator. It probably sounds pretty good. Um, but anyways, pushing on. So we have to where Kyle Reese is in this club, just dancing the night away, because what else does he better have to do? And so while he's dancing it out, waiting for the Terminator to probably kill Sarah Connor, because that's all he has to be here for, is to protect her, we have it to where the Terminator is making his way into the club without paying, and ultimately when uh, a bouncer ends up trying to take Arnold out of this club, he ends up breaking his hand, to where ultimately they just let him into the club to where he can have a good old time and dance around. So we have it to where Arnold had killed Ginger and Matt. Ultimately, I love the fight scene between Matt and Arnold that was in Sarah's apartment. Because ultimately, like, man, does Matt just get bashed around? And Matt just, like, grabs a lamp. He's like, I'm going to F you up. And he, like, takes a lamp and that does nothing. And so Matt just gets flinged against this mirror and all these kinds of other things, and ultimately gets smashed through a door where he then eventually Arnold has to kind of like walk over Matt's dead body to get to Ginger and fire shots at her like 5 or 6 times to make sure that she's dead. And then ultimately, that's when you get the answer machine of Sarah Connor. And then Arnold's like, oh crap, I killed the wrong person. So, pushing on to, again, back in the techno noir, where Arnold is like, yes, I'm going to kill everybody in this techno noir to get to Sarah Connor. Because I need to. Anyways, so we have it to where Arnold is slowly but surely making his way to Sarah Connor. Ultimately, maybe gonna sit next to her and ultimately asks if she wants to dance, and she probably won't. So Arnold gets closer and closer to finding Sarah Connor because ultimately that's what he does. That's what he does! He'll find her! So Arnold gets to Sarah Connor, and so recently you have to have now Kyle Reese just shoving people out of the way for like 12 hours, just shoving people out of this techno noir to ultimately get this shotgun out. You would think a shotgun coming out of someone's trench coat would immediately get people to just go, hey, yeah, let's get away from this guy because he's going to shoot somebody. To where ultimately also we have Arnold, who is like trying to like walk past a lot of people who are all dancing, ultimately ruining their sweet delicious dance moves. And so Arnold gets his gun out, and then Kyle gets his shotgun out, ultimately to shoot at the Terminator Man. And so ultimately the Terminator Man ends up getting blown away from Kyle's shotgun. And so reasonably everyone disperses, and then the credits roll and the movie's over. Man, that was a really quick movie. No. Anyways, of course the Terminator is going to get back up. A shotgun is not going to do any good. Like, you need a nuclear weapon to kill one of those bad boys. So we have it to where like Kyle is trying as best as possible to take down the Terminator, but a shotgun won't exactly do. You have it to where Kyle is grabbing onto Sarah Connor and running for their lives, to ultimately have it to where Kyle had learned how to hotwire a car, and so ultimately they are driving off in this hot-wired car. So we have it to where the police are seemingly trying to chase after Kyle, and seemingly trying to chase after anybody that is otherwise tied to this case. We ultimately have it seemingly where Arnold has to commandeer a police car and ultimately try to figure out where exactly Sarah Connor is, because ultimately Arnold in this movie has no eyebrows. So interesting enough, we also have a point where Arnold is going to smash the windshield of a car, which I was like, man, this scene is pretty awesome. So, pushing on, we have it to where Kyle eventually sneaks away. Kyle and Sarah ends up sneaking away. Ultimately, Kyle is asking Sarah, are you hurt? Are you injured? Are you whatever? So Kyle is kind of breaking down what is all going on, giving her stories of basically telling her like that that, yeah, I'm from the future. I'm 40 years from your future, and like you're gonna make a baby. His name is gonna be John Connor. Hopefully, that's the name that you were going with when you were gonna have a child. Because sucks to be you. Because I already told you what the name of your child is going to be. So again, sucks to be you. If you change it to any other name, we're always gonna call him John anyways. That's a thing. Why did she have to go with John Connor? She could have changed it. It could have been like Sinead O'Connor. Sinead O'Connor. She could have went with Connor. Like ultimately, yeah, like it would have really effed up the future. Because ultimately his name would have been John Connor. It would have been anything else but John Connor is what she should have named him. Because ultimately, doesn't that put a target right onto his face by calling him John Connor, the name of which that everyone is looking for what his name is to be? So, anyways, we have it to where Kyle is telling Sarah about his future, how he was sent back and time traveled, and so did also this Terminator that doesn't feel pity or remorse or absolutely will not stop, and less you give him something to stop him, which is probably I would probably say some froyo or probably some frozen yogurt. Then ultimately Terminator has to go and then check that out and then come back and then just like, yeah, that froyo, yeah, wasn't that good. But I need to go back to killing Sarah Connor. So froyo wasn't a thing in the 80s. Anyways, probably neither was frozen yogurt. Anyways, pushing on. So going on to here, we have Kyle giving Sarah the rundown and this and that, telling her about everything that is going on. And Sarah is thinking that probably Kyle is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but nah, she's just like, well, if anything, this is the only guy in this time period that is hitting on me, even though this guy is crazy as crackers. And so, really, you know what? How about he just makes me a bun in the oven at some point? So, we ultimately have it to where they otherwise decide, after sneaking away from the Terminator for the second time, um, because what ends up happening is we have it to where is Kyle and Sarah are driving away, but what happens is the police force ends up finding them anyways, and so reasonably Kyle can't defend Sarah against an army of police force and also a Terminator. So Kyle and Sarah turn themselves into the police. To ultimately, the police is mentioning that, oh yeah, this Terminator guy, he had a bulletproof vest on, and he was probably high on PCP, and again, he probably had a craving for yogurt. So that's why it was like making him completely unstoppable to anybody else. And they tried to rationalize all of it to this girl to just kind of mention how this guy could easily do all these things. But anyways, so we have it to where Sarah is going to have to just sit on a couch in the detective's office to ultimately sleep off whatever is going on. They're going to try to protect her. There's a ton of police that are all in this. This headquarters, this station, so she should be fine. Ultimately, we have to have this therapist who is seemingly talking to Silberman, Dr. Silberman. Ultimately, he is going and talking to Kyle, and we have it to where they end up taping a session of which that Kyle is talking, and seemingly everything about this story seems so rational and so reasonable to have Kyle being talking about it, how reasonably the Terminator is a living tissue over an endoskeleton, and reasonably we have to where Sarah Connor is the leader, the Sarah Connor's son is the leader of resistance, and so ultimately the Terminator is going back to try and kill her, to wipe her out before John Connor even becomes a blip on the radar or a, in some point, bun in the oven. So we have to where Kyle is relaying all this information to this doctor, really saying how he couldn't bring back any ray guns or any future tech because you can't bring back anything that's dead. But again, you have the Terminator who has living tissue over metal skeleton. So it's basically like, hey, yeah, that's a living thing. So that's why he could be taken back into a time period of sorts. So we have it to where ultimately the Terminator is ultimately having to kind of break into being a normal person in society, where ultimately he has his own apartment room. Ultimately, he's trying to fix portions of his body, his arm, because evidently his fingers weren't easily going to be able to give anybody the middle finger at some point. Ultimately, we have a lot of times where the Terminator is trying to fix himself, trying to seemingly carve out one of his eyes to otherwise have a much more robotic like eye, and then eventually popping on some sweet delicious sunglasses so you can't tell that Arnold doesn't have eyebrows in this movie. And so pushing on to eventually have Arnold make his way to go on into the police headquarters and ultimately say, hey, yeah, I'm here for Sarah Carter. Like, I would like to see her. Is she here? And ultimately, we have the police officer that is kind of telling him, it's like, yeah, but you can't be seen by anybody right now. And so the Terminator's like, well, I'll be back. So Arnold goes on his way to just kind of like, just sit around and ultimately just think like, man, am I ever going to be able to kill that Sarah Connor? I don't know. And while he's just stewing away, trying to figure out all the ways that he could kill Sarah Connor, he's going to take a car and ram into this police station with a car, because ultimately he really, really needs to get in to find that Sarah Connor. So we ultimately have it to where Arnold is crashing his way into this police station, which he should have just done immediately anyways. What was the whole point of, like, do you think anybody was going to easily be able to see the Sarah Connor? I don't think so. So we have Arnold who is just making his way through this police station and just grabbing big, gigantic, like, guns to otherwise annihilate every single one of these people that are in this police station. You ultimately have all the other police station, like, people, all the detectives, all fledgely running for their guns to try and take down this Terminator. And this scene is freaking awesome. Just the Terminator just going through this police station and decking people. And like, he is just running through all of these people in this darkness. And that is what makes this scene so freaking awesome. So we ultimately had that scene a little bit earlier where Kyle was talking to the therapist, ultimately mentioning that like he'll find her. That's all he does. He's going to rip her throat out and all this and that. He's going to kill her. To ultimately, Sarah Connor looks at this video and she's like, "Wow, you guys should have like stopped this like 5 minutes ago." But the therapist is like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't quite remember that was you that he was talking about. Oh, my bad. My bad." So Recently, we have it to where now Kyle Reese is ultimately in the lunatic wing of this police station, and ultimately and easily he ends up taking out one of the security guys and ends up getting free from his shackles to ultimately try to find the Sarah Connor. So Sarah Connor becomes so terrified that everybody is consistently dying. She just hides herself underneath a desk because she is terrified. Ultimately, we have Kyle who is desperately trying to find Sarah Connor within this police station, and luckily enough, he turned into the one room that Sarah Connor was in because ultimately he knew that she was going to be hiding into a desk because he's from the future. So we have it to where Kyle is ultimately shouting for Sarah, and Sarah goes out uh, to ultimately see Kyle. Because here's the thing: you could have had the Terminator sounding just like Kyle Reese, and ultimately going and killing Sarah Connor, and again, credits would have rolled, and this movie would have been a lot quicker done. But that's not how the movie plays out. So we ultimately have it to where we have Kyle and Sarah Connor ending up running away now for the second time. And the Terminator is just killing all the police officers, and gee golly shucks, he can't get to the Sarah Connor or the Kyle Reese. So we ultimately have it to where Kyle and Sarah end up evading the Terminator yet again to head into seemingly underneath a bridge of sorts or some kind of inner tube or tunnel or something, to where they can seemingly sneak away for seemingly a night to where they can sleep. And ultimately, we find out that Kyle has been supposedly shot in the arm, and so Sarah has to know anything about the future, and so uh, that's when we get to be told that that little scene of which that ultimately we get to find out what these Terminators are or what could tell us something about the future. And so while that is going on, Sarah is field dressing Kyle Reese, and so we also have Kyle Reese giving Sarah Connor, John Connor's speech that ultimately he had Kyle memorize. And so that all basically every single thing that you've ever seen in your life that ultimately will be iterated in some portion of whatever. To consistently tell us that the future is not set, that reasonably there is a way of which to change the future, but when really looking at it, you just have to live through whatever this future is, because ultimately the future is not set, but technically it really is, because it's not like they drastically change everything through any of the other movies, so everything has to be set a certain way, with the exclusion of probably the whole John Connor thing when we get to Dark Fate. But anyways, so pushing on into this movie a little bit more. So going on into here, we have to where Sarah Connor and Kyle Reese end up actually getting and renting a apartment, because evidently they couldn't have done that earlier. Because Kyle Reese needs to desperately need to get a kitchen to ultimately make a bomb or seemingly dynamite, to be able to say the words one, dynamite, but then also to be able to try to kill the Terminator. Because ultimately, Kyle had said before that the weapons that are in this time period are a little bit too primitive, and ultimately he doesn't know if he could actually kill the Terminator, because reasonably they just haven't gone into a, manufacturing place that could end up crushing the Terminator at some point. So we end up having Kyle Reese making all these bombs, for ultimately he has to tell Sarah exactly what to do. So evidently, Sarah Connor ends up calling her mother just to say, "Hey, mom, how's it going? Just to let you know, I'm at this apartment building." just in case you needed to find me for any reason. Hopefully, you're not the Terminator. I really hope you aren't. But if you are, then that really sucks. And all the while, Sarah Connor is talking to her mother, what she assumes is her mother, and is actually the Terminator. Mother. Like I said. So, Terminator evidently crashed into Sarah Connor's mom's house to go ahead and just kill her off, so he can find out where she exactly is. Luckily for her, luckily for the Terminator, Sarah Connor and Sarah Connor's mom live in the same state, I guess. Luckily for the Terminator, that he doesn't have to travel that far to find Sarah Connor's mother. So, we ultimately have it to where Sarah Connor is now thinking, like, well, I'm probably going to die pretty soon. Maybe I should look at Kyle and just be like, he's a nice slice of whatever. And so recently, we have this pushing towards Sarah Connor is ultimately mentioning, it's like, well, do you have women in your future? And, like, did you have any significant other in your future? And Kyle is just like, no. Like, if anything, women are really good fighters, but if anything, like, the only person that I ever loved was you, Sarah Connor, even though I've never seen you in my life. Like, I always, like, would look at your picture fondly and just be like, yeah, this is the one girl for me. Because ultimately this girl is the legendary Sarah Connor, which ultimately he desperately wanted to go back in time to meet Sarah Connor to tell her that her future is not set. And so recently we have Kyle, who had really told Sarah Connor to gently put these, like, grenades together. Ultimately, he is just tossing angrily these grenades into this bag, ultimately telling Sarah Connor, like, yeah, I shouldn't have told you that. I shouldn't have said that I've always loved you. And this and that, to where ultimately Sarah Connor is like, well, like, that's okay. Because ultimately they end up into some bedroom business. Because reasonably, Kyle was mentioning that supposedly John Connor's father had died sometime previously to the war. And so Sarah Connor is like, well, I'm probably going to need to have a baby as soon as possible to pop out this John Connor fella. So I guess this guy is just going to have to be it. So bedroom business comes on down, and we ultimately have it to where Arnold is coming on down to the apartment to ultimately try and find Kyle and Sarah Connor. We ultimately have a dog barking in the distance. And even at some point we have like Arnold, who, when he was at his apartment, funny enough, there was some kind of cleaning guy where ultimately was like, hey, is there a dead animal in your apartment room there, Terminator? And the Terminator's like, F off. But anyways, so Arnold ends up going his way to this apartment, and so we have it to where Sarah and Kyle are taken off guard by the Terminator man, but ultimately they end up slipping away to ultimately have this old chase sequence all over again. To ultimately there is to be led to where there are chases afoot, to where ultimately Kyle and Sarah are running off because ultimately their car flips over and so on and so forth. Like, repetitiously just having it to where like Terminator ends up getting into this gas tanker, because Kyle keeps like tossing out these dynamite like things, ultimately to get shot by the Terminator, to where he ends up blowing up one of the Terminators, because I guess the Terminator shoots the dynamite out of Kyle's hand, and so reasonably Kyle is almost near death. So we have it to where, again, Sarah and Kyle's car flips over. They end up running off foot to get away from the Terminator. The Terminator ends up getting run over by this gas tanker, and so eventually you have Arnold getting into this gas tanker, ultimately telling the guy leave. And so uh, Sarah Connor is running from this gas tanker. Kyle is tossing one piece of dynamite into this gas tanker for this gas tanker to explode, and to Sarah Connor to repetitiously keep running off. So we have it eventually to where Kyle and Sarah regroup together, all while the Terminator is now completely a metal skeleton and just walking about, just going, "Hey, yeah, hey, where's Kyle and where's Sarah? I gotta find them." Like, if anything, like there's a party coming on at like 7 o'clock. Like, come on, like I'm just trying to find them to get them to this party that they desperately need to go to. So we have it to where Kyle and Sarah are ultimately now in this warehouse that ultimately has all these this computer and or warehouse like machines of sorts that ultimately could be turned on to ultimately confuse Terminator to not be able to track them down. So they're going through this warehouse, ultimately just taking a little tour because heaven forbid they have anything else to do. We have a tour where the Terminator is smashing through this door, ultimately just like, "Hey guys, what about that party that's going to happen at 7?" Like, are we still going? So we have to where Terminator is smashing a hole through this door to ultimately get this door to now unlock so that way he can make his way through. Like, kind of hobbling his way in, because evidently one of his legs is effed up. So he's hobbling all in, ultimately finding some other mechanical things that are ultimately confusing him. And so we end up having Kyle and Sarah just keep walking through this tour of this warehouse. Ultimately, we have Kyle at some point grabbing onto some metal pipe or some pipe of sorts because reasonably he's running out of dynamite, and ultimately he has nothing else to do but to hit this guy with a pipe, because what else can you do at that point? It kind of gets down to every single time it comes down to a hand-to-hand kind of thing, and it rationally or reasonably never makes sense to have that be that way, because ultimately you have plenty of times where, like in the movie Friday the 13th, Jason Takes Manhattan, where you have this one kid who ends up just repetitiously punching and kicking Jason, and of course Jason is no selling. He's just kind of going like, "Nah, yeah, go ahead, keep kicking me, because eventually you're going to tire yourself out," which this guy does, and then Jason easily and quickly kills him. So we have it to where Kyle and Sarah, again, taking the tour, taking the long way around, and so eventually we have the Terminator eventually finding Kyle and Sarah. And so Kyle is telling Sarah to run while hitting the Terminator with his pipe repetitiously. And then eventually, finally, the Terminator finally gets one lick in to hit Kyle, to where when the Terminator is making his way to get to Sarah, Kyle puts a stick of dynamite into the Terminator and then falls down the stairs, because that's what he really and truly wanted to do, was to basically die. Because reasonably, if he wasn't almost dead repetitiously, man, that falling down the stairs could really do the trick for him. But Sarah is like really trying to like lug Kyle all over the place, where she's ultimately like threatening him, like, "Get up, soldier!" Like, "Move your feet," and all this. But eventually that whole falling down the stairs thing really did Kyle in. And so really we just have half of the Terminator now, like his legs are completely blown, just dragging his way over Kyle's dead body to still make it to Sarah, to where Sarah is now trying to go through this factory again to finish up this tour, to have it to where the Terminator is ending up following her because she can barely move because her leg is effed up. And so, because she like twisted her knee or twisted her ankle or probably twisted any number of things. So, we have it to where Sarah Connor is just making her way through this one machine that is seemingly going to be some press of sorts. So ultimately, the Terminator is going to follow her because, again, he desperately needs to finally get to this party that, like, dude, like, we have 20 minutes to get there. Like, come on. Like, I've been telling you guys about this party for I don't know how long now, and you got, like, I've been texting you, I've, like, been trying to tell you, like, hey guys, remember about the party? And you're just like, yeah, I don't know, like, we still have to bring like a present. We still have to bring like some champagne or something, like something nice. We still have to kind of find out where that is. We still have to get something of that. And like I don't know if we're gonna make it right at 7, but the Terminator is just like, but I want to be there right at 7. Like, good God, like how, if anything, like I even want to be there early. So we have to where the Terminator is making his way through this metal pressing like thing. And so Sarah Connor, while watching the Terminator's arm being stretched out to get her, ultimately she is bizarrely just randomly figuring out if there's any contraption that is anywhere around her to hit any number of buttons, because ultimately she's, I guess, going to hit any correct button to squish upon this metal press and to ultimately tell the Terminator, it's like, you're terminated, fucker. And then ultimately squish the Terminator slowly but surely. And to where ultimately you have this bizarre thing of lightning that is coming out of the Terminator bizarrely. And here's the thing. When we have all the other Terminator movies where we've had it to where this Terminator has a big, gigantic explosive thing that is within its chest, why is it that the Terminator didn't just annihilate Sarah Connor anyways? Like, was the crushing thing to do the trick to not explode this Terminator and, like, explode this warehouse? You would have thought that this Terminator would have had something inside of it to just completely and utterly just explode this whole place, and Sarah would have been dead, and then there would have been no John Connor bun in the oven. But we have to where Connor ends up surviving this warehouse to ultimately go on a road trip where ultimately she is talking to some kid in some gas station that is ultimately taking a photo of her and asking for $5. Where ultimately Sarah Connor is like, "Hey, good con, kid." So she ultimately is, we find out Sarah Connor is ultimately taking a road trip with a dog, and she is ultimately doing recordings for John Connor to hear when he is much older. Because ultimately, after that whole warehouse scene, like, Sarah just goes on a road trip because she ultimately wants to be an adventurer, I guess, of sorts. So she goes off to drive off into the sunset with her Jeep and her dog, and that's just how the movie just ends. Not with a Terminator slowly but surely walking his way to Sarah, or we ultimately find out that Kyle Reese was actually still alive, and he was like, "Hey, yeah, I'm gonna find her." No. But anyways, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.